The streets of Toledo, Ohio, lay almost deserted, bathed in a dim orange glow from scattered streetlights. It was just past 11 p.m.
Like and subscribe.
The hour when the city felt abandoned, when only the occasional worker or restless soul roamed. Lieutenant General Elena Brooks gripped the steering wheel of her black, government-issued SUV with steady hands. She had spent the last few hours in a grueling logistics meeting 2 states away, and now all she wanted was the quiet comfort of her home. Her mind wandered, not from fatigue, but from focus, a steady hum of discipline that had been her companion through wars, disasters, and years of unflinching service. The SUV's windows were lightly tinted, nothing flashy. The vehicle, like her, was all function, no frills. Elena wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. Her tires whispered across the empty asphalt. Her movements deliberate, methodical just like always. But down the side of Reynolds Road, Officer Jason Crowley sat slouched in his patrol car, nursing a lukewarm coffee and scrolling aimlessly through his phone. His shift had been dead slow, no excitement, no adrenaline, no opportunity to prove authority. So when he saw an unfamiliar SUV glide past, he didn't hesitate. He tossed the coffee into the passenger seat, flicked on his flashing lights, and swung out onto the road. Elena spotted the sudden flash of red and blue in her rearview mirror. Without panic, she slowed down, clicked on her blinker, and pulled smoothly to the curb. Hands at 10 and 2, window lowered halfway, chest rising and falling in a measured rhythm. Stay calm. Stay controlled. In her mirror, she watched the patrol car door fling open. Crowley emerged, tall and brisk, one hand resting casually but purposefully on his holster, the other gripping a flashlight that cut through the darkness like an accusation. He didn't approach the passenger side as protocol often recommended for safety. No, he came straight to her window, all swagger and presumption, license and registration. He barked, voice sharp, flashlight blinding her face. Elena didn't flinch. "Officer," she said, her tone even and respectful. "May I ask why I was stopped?" Crowley narrowed his eyes, the beam of his flashlight not wavering. "You were drifting between lanes," he snapped. "Looked like you might have been drinking." Elena's eyebrows lifted slightly. She hadn't been drifting. She hadn't had so much as a sip of anything stronger than water in days. Still, without argument, she moved deliberately, training and instinct guiding every slow, visible motion. She opened the glove box, retrieved her paperwork, and handed it over. "This is a government vehicle," she added calmly. "I am a federal officer." Crowley snorted. A half smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Military," he said with a sneer, "doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was," Elena replied, voice quiet but firm. Crowley's smirk faded into a scowl. Without warning, his voice rose. "Step out of the vehicle." Elena's jaw tightened. "On what grounds?" "Officer, I have complied with every request, and I have not been drinking." "Step out." He barked louder, fist banging once against the door. For a moment, the air between them buzzed, electric with unspoken danger. Elena could see it the way his hand hovered too close to his holster, the thin thread of impatience unraveling. Don't escalate. Don't resist. But don't be silent either. With practiced calm, Elena reached for her phone resting in the cup holder. She pressed the record button. Just before unbuckling her seatbelt, she said clearly, "For the record, this conversation is being recorded." Crowley's eyes flicked briefly to the glowing red dot on her screen. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face, but only for a second. He yanked the door open himself. Out. Now, and with the kind of quiet, grounded dignity that could not be taught, only earned. Elena Brooks stepped out onto the cracked asphalt. Not with defiance, not with submission, but with the unshakable steadiness of a woman who had faced bigger battles than the badge flashing in her face tonight. The night was far from over. It had just begun. The cold air bit at Elena's skin as she stood on the side of the deserted road, her boots planted firmly on the cracked asphalt. The flashing red and blue lights from Crowley's cruiser pulsed over her face, painting her strong features with alternating stripes of accusation and defiance. Officer Jason Crowley circled her like a shark sensing blood. His flashlight bobbed in one hand, the other never far from his holster. In his mind, Elena wasn't a lieutenant general. She was just another late-night driver, one he expected to intimidate into submission. Walk a straight line. Now, he barked. Elena said nothing. She offered no challenge, no apology. Instead, she moved with military precision, stepping heel to toe, heel to toe, along the faded white stripe on the roadside. Not a stumble, not a wobble. Each step a testament to years of discipline that no flashlight, no badge, could diminish. Crowley narrowed his eyes. Recite the alphabet backwards, he demanded. Elena inhaled slowly, steadying herself, not because she doubted her ability, but because she knew this wasn't a test of sobriety. It was a test of control, a test of dignity. She did it flawlessly, clearly her voice slicing through the cool night air. Still, Crowley wasn't satisfied. He scribbled hastily onto his ticket pad, the pen scratching like claws. Without looking up, he muttered, "Failure to maintain lane." He tore the slip off with a theatrical jerk and held it out toward her, not bothering to meet her eyes. Elena accepted the paper with 2 fingers. No reaction, no anger, just a small, almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. The recording on her phone continued silently, a witness to everything the night refused to hide. She turned without a word, walked back to her vehicle, and closed the door with deliberate gentleness. As she pulled back onto the road, the ticket sitting on the passenger seat like a scarlet letter, Elena's mind wasn't swirling with rage. It was calculating. This wasn't just about her. It was about every woman like her, every soldier, every civilian who had been taught to endure, to stay silent in the face of arrogance wrapped in authority. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't curse. But she would answer. And when she did, it wouldn't be under the cold gaze of flashing lights. It would be under the white, unwavering lights of a courtroom. And it would be Crowley who had to explain. The glow of Elena's office lamp cast long, tired shadows against the walls of Fort Wayne's logistics headquarters. She sat alone at her desk, the ticket Crowley had issued resting beside her untouched coffee. Outside, the world kept moving, soldiers drilling, trucks rumbling, but inside, time seemed to stand still. Elena leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The encounter playing over and over in her mind like a film reel, she couldn't pause. It wasn't just the stop. It was the way he looked at her, not as a decorated leader, not even as a fellow human being, but as a threat, a nuisance. There was no misunderstanding. There was only arrogance and assumption. A soft knock broke the silence. Sergeant Lisa Daniels, her trusted aide, peeked in, eyes full of concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Elena sat up, smoothing the creases of her uniform almost reflexively. "I'm handling it," she said, voice even. Daniels hesitated at the doorway, sensing the storm brewing behind her superior's calm face. I saw the footage. "Ma'am?" "If you need anything, base legal. Public affairs, just say the word." Elena turned the phone screen toward her, watching the recording again. The moment Crowley yanked open her car door, frozen in harsh digital clarity. The temptation to bury it, to move on, flickered through her mind. It would be easier, cleaner, safer. But something deeper burned inside her, hotter than fear, sharper than anger. She wasn't just thinking about herself. She was thinking about every young soldier she'd mentored, every junior officer who had learned to lower their eyes and bite their tongue, every black woman told to stay silent just to stay safe. No more. I already called legal this morning, Elena said quietly, closing the video with a final tap. Complaints being filed. Daniel stepped into the room, lowering her voice. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Ma'am? It'll go public. Might get ugly. Elena's eyes met hers, unflinching. I'm not looking for drama, Sergeant, she said. I'm looking for accountability. And she meant it. Her career hadn't been built on noise. It had been built on discipline, on doing what was right, not what was easy. Elena Brooks didn't pick fights, but she didn't run from them either. That night, under the muted hum of fluorescent lights, she attached the video, the complaint, and every relevant regulation into one clean, damning email. She clicked send without hesitation. No fanfare, no anger, only purpose. The quiet storm had begun, and Jason Crowley had no idea what was coming. 3 mornings later, Officer Jason Crowley sat in the break room of the Toledo Police Department, laughing louder than the stale coffee deserved. She thought her badge scared me, he boasted to Officer Nathan Briggs, who half listened while stirring powdered creamer into his cup, flashing her military ID like it was a magic wand. I wrote her up like anybody else. No special treatment. Briggs forced a chuckle, but his eyes flickered nervously toward the bulletin board across the room, where a plain manila envelope had just been pinned with Crowley's name in bold letters. Crowley noticed it too. Still grinning, he swaggered over and ripped the envelope free, the paper crackling under his rough fingers. He opened it right there, not expecting much. Maybe another memo about patrol routes. Maybe a reminder about the department holiday party. What he pulled out instead stopped his breath cold. Court summons. Plaintiff, Lieutenant General Elena Brooks. Charges: unlawful detainment, intimidation, abuse of authority. For a full 10 seconds, Crowley just stood there, staring at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. Then he let out a harsh, forced laugh. No way, he muttered. No way this holds. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He crumpled the letter into his fist and stormed toward the captain's office, slamming the door behind him without knocking. Inside, Captain Peter Grayson sat at his desk, hands folded, face grim. He had been expecting this. We need to talk, Grayson said without preamble. Crowley dropped into the chair across from him, arms crossed defiantly. Let me guess, the general wants special treatment now. Grayson didn't rise to the bait. You don't understand who you pulled over, Jason, he said flatly. Elena Brooks isn't just a soldier. She's a decorated war veteran. She's chaired disaster relief operations bigger than this whole city. She's got medals you can't even spell. Crowley scoffed. And, Grayson continued, voice tightening. She has powerful allies, military brass, state officials, maybe even federal. Crowley leaned back, smirking. On the street. Doesn't matter who you are. I followed procedure. Grayson's eyes narrowed. Did you? Because now, you're not facing a traffic dispute. You're facing a civil rights lawsuit. And every second you treated her like a criminal instead of a citizen is on body cam. For the first time, Crowley faltered. You're going to court, Jason, Grayson said, leaning forward, voice cold. And if this blows up, and it will, don't think for a second that badge will protect you. Crowley clenched his fists so tightly, the paper crinkled loudly in his hand. When he stormed out of the office, the hallway felt different. The usual nods from fellow officers were absent. The usual cocky weight in his step had turned leaden. The whispers had already started. And back at Fort Wayne, in a much quieter office, Elena Brooks sat reviewing deployment schedules, her mind calm, her heart steady. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The base legal office at Fort Wayne buzzed quietly low murmurs, the faint tapping of keyboards, papers sliding across desks. In the middle of it all, Lieutenant General Elena Brooks sat calmly, reviewing her case with a meticulousness honed through decades of military command. Across from her sat Avery Hamilton, a sharp-eyed attorney who had represented some of the military's toughest cases. Today, however, he looked at Elena with an unusual mixture of admiration and caution. "You know this won't stay quiet," Avery said, tapping a pen against the folder filled with evidence. "Once we file officially, once the hearings start, the media could grab it, especially because of who you are." Elena nodded, unbothered. "I'm not doing this for attention," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I'm doing this so the next soldier, the next black woman, doesn't have to decide between her dignity and her safety." Avery leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment. Most people he met in these situations wanted money, revenge, headlines. Elena wanted none of those. She wanted accountability. On the table before them lay everything they needed. The recording from Elena's phone clear, unedited. Crowley's body cam footage aggressive, threatening, undeniable. Witness statements about Elena's spotless service record. Departmental policies on traffic stops and conduct all violated. Avery tapped the documents. "You have a strong case," he said. "But remember, courtrooms are unpredictable. Public opinion even more so." Elena smiled faintly. "That's the beauty of the truth. Avery, it doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be clear." Outside the window, the American flag snapped sharply in the wind against a steel-gray sky. Elena's path had never been easy. She had crossed continents, led soldiers into disaster zones, rebuilt supply chains under fire. But this standing alone, not against an enemy in uniform, but against an enemy in assumption, felt heavier than any battlefield. Later that evening, she returned to her office. She sat quietly under the muted lights, reviewing her own footage again, not out of doubt, but preparation. Every word, every gesture, every injustice, captured frame by frame. In another folder, she kept a list. Fort Wayne Logistics Command, FEMA Disaster Coordination Teams, African American Women in Uniform Leadership Council. These weren't just supporters. They were witnesses to her character. Proof that the woman Crowley had treated like a threat was, in reality, a symbol of service, honor, and restraint. Before leaving for the night, Elena paused by the window, looking out over the sleeping base. She wasn't seeking a fight, but if the system wanted to test her resolve, it would soon learn. Elena Brooks didn't fight for herself. She fought for everyone who had ever been told to stay silent, and she had never lost a battle worth fighting. The courthouse steps loomed ahead, broad and gray under the early morning sun. A small cluster of onlookers gathered near the entrance, whispering in low voices, their eyes flickering between the heavy oak doors and the street beyond. Then they saw her. Lieutenant General Elena Brooks emerged from a black SUV, walking with the quiet command of someone who had led troops through deserts and disasters. She wore her full military dress uniform, gleaming metals pinned to her chest, polished boots striking against the stone, shoulders back, head high. There was no need for a speech, no need for a headline. Her very presence, steady, dignified, immovable, said everything. Inside the courtroom, Officer Jason Crowley sat at the defense table. His usual swagger wilted under the weight of the moment. He glanced up and froze. The sight of Elena in her uniform, stars and ribbons catching the light, shook something loose inside him. For the first time since that night, doubt gnawed at the edges of his pride. The gallery filled quickly, soldiers from Fort Wayne in crisp dress blues, civilian supporters in muted colors, even a few uniformed police officers from Crowley's own department. They sat shoulder to shoulder, A silent wall of witnesses. No reporters yet. No cameras. Just the heavy, solemn breathing of a crowd that understood something important was about to happen. Judge Harriet Monroe, a woman known for her sharp mind and sharp gavel, entered the room and called everyone to order. The trial of Brooks versus Crowley had begun. When Elena's name was called, she stood. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. Each step to the witness stand was measured, deliberate the same way she had walked into briefing rooms in Baghdad, into shelters after hurricanes, into bases built on dust and grit. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and sat down. The judge cleared her throat, regarding Elena with a rare softness. "Lieutenant General Brooks," she said, "thank you for your service. You may proceed." Elena's attorney, Avery Hamilton, rose smoothly. "Lieutenant General," he began, voice respectful but strong. "Please describe the night of February 17th. Elena's voice, when it came, was clear and steady, every syllable weighed and certain. "I was driving back from a logistics meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve," she said. "I was stopped without cause. I cooperated fully. I identified myself as a federal officer operating a government vehicle. In return, I was treated with hostility, threatened without justification, and unlawfully detained." There was no anger in her voice, no tears, only truth. When the time came, the courtroom lights dimmed slightly, and the first piece of evidence played on the monitor, Elena's phone recording. The room watched in silence as the grainy video unfolded. Crowley's aggressive tone, his hand hovering dangerously near his weapon. Elena's calm compliance, the senselessness of it all. Then came the body cam footage. Wider angle. Same story. By the time the videos ended, the atmosphere in the room had shifted a tension so thick it felt almost physical. Elena sat quietly, composed. As murmurs rippled through the audience, she hadn't raised her voice that night. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't resisted. She had simply refused to shrink. And now, the whole world could see it. Crowley's lawyer, Sam Bennett, rose for cross-examination, attempting a polite smile that fell flat. "Lieutenant General Brooks," he said, "isn't it possible Officer Crowley was simply concerned for safety?" Elena turned her gaze toward him, calm and unblinking. "Concern without discipline is fear," she replied. "And fear is not an excuse for unlawful behavior." The judge's pen paused midair at that. No one needed to be told. In that courtroom, Elena Brooks wasn't just a plaintiff. She was a leader. A storm not loud, but unstoppable, had awakened. And it had a name. The courtroom lights dimmed again as the evidence technician queued up the next piece of footage. First came Elena's cell phone video steady, unwavering. The screen showed a first-person view of Officer Crowley standing over her, flashlight glaring into her face, voice cutting through the night like a blade. His hand hovered dangerously close to his weapon, his tone not protective, but domineering. His posture not cautious, but confrontational. The jury leaned forward in their seats, absorbing every uncomfortable detail. Elena's voice on the video remained calm, respectful. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she disobey. The video ended with the mechanical tearing sound of Crowley handing her the ticket. His words curt and dismissive. Silence fell over the courtroom, heavy, suffocating. Then, the technician switched feeds, now showing Crowley's body cam footage. Different angle. Same injustice. This time, the room saw Crowley's aggressive approach before even asking for her documents. His flashlight shoved aggressively toward her window. His unjustified escalation when she calmly asked for clarification. His impatient, clipped commands ignoring all reasonable communication. The jury didn't need expert testimony to interpret it. The truth played itself. Crowley sat rigidly at the defense table, his jaw working furiously against itself. Gone was the casual cockiness he carried at the stop. In its place, raw, undeniable exposure. When the footage ended, Avery Hamilton stood once more, facing Elena with a measured voice. "Lieutenant General Brooks," he asked, "at any point during the encounter, did you resist Officer Crowley's instructions?" Elena answered without hesitation. "No." "Did you raise your voice, make threats, or disobey lawful commands?" "No." "Did you ever attempt to flee, conceal your identity, or display aggression?" "Never." Hamilton nodded, pacing slowly before the jury. "In fact," he continued, "did you attempt to de-escalate the situation?" "Yes." "I identified myself, complied with his instructions, and maintained professionalism." The clarity of her testimony filled the room like rising water. Undeniable and steady, Crowley's lawyer, Sam Bennett, stood for cross-examination, his demeanor tight. "Lieutenant General Brooks," he said cautiously, "could it not be argued that Officer Crowley was exercising reasonable caution during a late-night stop?" Elena turned to him, her voice low but powerful. "Caution is not an excuse for disrespect. Caution is not an excuse for escalation. And authority," she added, her gaze cutting through the courtroom, "is not an excuse for intimidation." There was a moment, a breathless stillness, where no one moved. Even the judge seemed to hesitate before adjusting her papers. Then, slowly, Avery Hamilton approached the prosecution's table, gathering a final document. He spoke clearly, for the room to hear. "This case is not about perfect officers or perfect citizens. It is about duty and the failure to uphold it." Lieutenant General Brooks didn't demand special treatment. She demanded the minimum standard every citizen deserves: respect, fairness, and safety. Crowley's face flushed deep red. He couldn't erase the footage. He couldn't twist Elena's calm professionalism into rebellion. The truth stood in front of him, undeniable, immovable, and it wore a uniform decorated with decades of honor, not arrogance. The judge's gavel struck the sound block once, sharp and final. Sergeant Jason Crowley. Judge Harriet Monroe said, "You may approach." Crowley rose stiffly, every step toward the witness stand feeling heavier than the last. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the smirk. Now, under the scrutiny of the courtroom and under the unflinching gaze of Elena Brooks, he looked smaller, like a man dragging his own mistakes behind him. After swearing in, he sat, his shoulders rigid, hands clasped tightly in his lap. The prosecutor, Avery Hamilton, stepped forward, his voice smooth but unyielding. "Sergeant Crowley," he began, "on the night of February 17th, why did you initiate the traffic stop?" Crowley cleared his throat. "She was drifting between lanes," he said, his voice flat. "And when she complied with your instructions, did she show signs of impairment?" Crowley shifted uncomfortably. "No." "Did she resist?" "No." "Did she threaten you in any way?" Another pause. "No." Hamilton's tone sharpened slightly. "Then, Sergeant, why did you escalate the situation? Why order her out of the vehicle without clear cause?" Crowley's jaw tightened. "She questioned me," he said after a moment. Hamilton raised an eyebrow. "Is questioning an officer grounds for detainment?" Crowley opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence was louder than any answer. "No," he muttered, finally. Hamilton pressed on. "At any point during the encounter, were you aware that Lieutenant General Brooks was a decorated military officer, operating a government vehicle, conducting official business?" Crowley's shoulders sagged slightly. "No." "And if you had known..." The room leaned in, breath collectively held. Crowley hesitated longer this time, then spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Might have handled it differently." There it was. Not an apology, not an excuse, Just the ugly, plain truth. He hadn't treated Elena with respect because he hadn't thought she deserved it. A heavy silence gripped the room. The jurors' faces, once neutral, were now etched with quiet judgment. Hamilton stepped back, letting the moment hang. He didn't need to push further. Crowley had condemned himself. Judge Monroe finally spoke, voice crisp. "You may step down, Sergeant." Crowley returned to his seat at the defense table, avoiding every eye in the room, including his own lawyer's disappointed glance. Elena remained composed, her hands folded neatly on the table before her. She hadn't smiled. She hadn't flinched. She didn't need to. The truth had broken through clean, undeniable, and devastating. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about principle. About a line that had been crossed and a woman who refused to pretend it hadn't. As the day's session ended, Elena gathered her notes with quiet efficiency. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. The real victory wasn't in what Crowley had admitted. It was in the fact that for once, the system had been forced to listen, and tomorrow, it would be forced to deliver its verdict. The morning of the verdict dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. Inside the courtroom, there were fewer people now, no buzzing crowds, no whispered speculations, only the essential players remained. Elena Brooks, sitting tall and composed. Jason Crowley, hunched low at the defense table, his lawyer whispering last-minute reassurances he barely heard. The jury, solemn and unsmiling. The door creaked open. Judge Harriet Monroe entered, robes flowing like a wave of finality. She took her seat and nodded to the jury foreman. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, stood with a folded paper in her hands. In the case of Lieutenant General Elena Brooks versus Sergeant Jason Crowley, she began. "We find in favor of the plaintiff." A sharp intake of breath swept the room, but no one spoke. The foreman continued. "We find that Sergeant Crowley violated the plaintiff's constitutional rights through unlawful detainment, intimidation, and abuse of authority." Crowley's head sank lower. Elena remained perfectly still. Judge Monroe's voice carried across the room, cutting through the heavy air. "The court awards Lieutenant General Brooks $35,000 in damages. Furthermore, this ruling will be entered into public record. It will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for immediate review and policy reform consideration." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "No criminal charges will be filed at this time," the judge concluded. "But this court acknowledges the harm inflicted not just upon the individual standing before us, but upon the public trust itself." There was no eruption of applause, no shouts of vindication, only silence heavy, final, real. Elena's lawyer, Avery Hamilton, leaned over and whispered, "We could appeal for more if you want." Elena shook her head once. It was never about the money. Across the aisle, Crowley's lawyer murmured frantically in his ear, "We'll appeal. We'll file motions." But even he didn't sound convinced. The damage had already been done, not just on paper, but in the shifting glances, the tightened shoulders, the undeniable recognition that the badge hadn't made Crowley untouchable. As people filed out quietly, Elena remained seated for a moment longer. She allowed herself a single breath deep, grounding, victorious in its own quiet way. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't demanded vengeance. She had demanded accountability, and she had received it. When she finally rose, Elena didn't look toward Crowley. She didn't need to. This fight had never been about defeating him personally. It had been about standing up for herself, for those who couldn't, and for the dignity that no one, badge or not, had the right to strip away. Outside the courthouse, the sky began to lighten. Not much, but enough. 2 months later, The lecture hall at Fort Wayne bustled with the low energy of young recruits' freshly ironed uniforms, newly polished boots, and wide eyes filled with nervous ambition. They sat straight-backed, notebooks open, eager to absorb lessons about logistics, protocol, battlefield tactics. But today's session would be different. The room hushed as Lieutenant General Elena Brooks entered, not in her dress uniform adorned with medals, but in her daily fatigues. Simple, practical, uncompromising. She walked to the front with the same steady grace that had carried her through war zones, through courtrooms, through battles invisible to most. No slides, no lengthy notes, just her voice and the truth she had fought so hard to defend. She let the silence settle before speaking. "How many of you believe," she asked, her voice calm but commanding, "that wearing this uniform automatically earns you respect?" A few hands lifted hesitantly. Some certain, some unsure. Elena nodded slowly, pacing in front of them. "I understand why you think that," she said. "The weight of the uniform feels powerful. The badge, the rank, the medals." She paused, letting her words hang. "But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Respect isn't issued with your uniform. It isn't stitched onto your rank. It isn't assumed because of your title." The room was silent now, not out of fear, but attention. Respect is earned choice by choice, action by action, and authority without humility, she said, her voice tightening, is just fear pretending to be power. She stopped in the center of the room, meeting the eyes of every young soldier one by one. 2 months ago, she continued, an officer pulled me over. He didn't know who I was. He didn't care to find out. Because in that moment, he didn't see a lieutenant general. He saw someone he thought he could control. A murmur rippled through the recruits. I could have screamed. I could have raged. I could have done nothing, like so many are told to do. She shook her head. But I didn't. Elena's voice softened, but the strength within it sharpened. I stayed calm. I recorded the truth. I went to court, and I let the truth stand taller than my anger ever could. Another silence followed, this one deeper, heavier with meaning. Leadership, she said, isn't about barking orders. It's about bearing the weight of your authority with honor. It's about standing up even when standing is quiet, even when standing is lonely. She looked across the sea of young faces, future leaders, future defenders, and smiled. Just slightly. You don't just wear this uniform for yourself, she said. You wear it for every person who ever dreamed of justice. You wear it for those who are watching, praying you'll do better than those before you. Elena closed her folder, no longer needing notes. She had already left her real message etched into the hearts of everyone present. As she stepped down from the platform, the recruits rose to their feet not by command, but by instinct, not applause. Respect. The kind earned not by force, but by truth. And outside, as Elena walked back into the bright morning light, she knew the legacy she carried wasn't stitched onto her uniform. It lived in every moment she chose to stand. And it would live long after the courtroom. The rank and the titles had faded in the choices of those who dared to follow her example.